True, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am. But why will you say that I'm mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthy, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how the first idea had entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object there was none. Passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had that eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold. And so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of that eye forever. Now at this point you fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing, but you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded. With what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I never kindered to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him, and every night about midnight I turned the latch on the door and opened it, oh so gently. And then when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed that no light shone out, and that I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously. Oh, so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon that vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights, every night, just at midnight, and I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in hearty tone, and inquiring how he had passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man indeed, to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watchman's minute hand moved more quickly than did mine. Never before that night I had felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. To think that there I was, opening the door, little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was black as pitch, with a thick darkness, for the shutters were close fastened through fear of robbers, and so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing in, steadily. I had my head in, and was about to open the lantern, when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, The old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed listening, just as I had done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of a mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief. Oh no. It was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt and pitied him, although I chuckled at the heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in his bed. His fear had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but he could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor. Or, it is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with these suspicions, but he had found all in vain. All in vain, because death is approaching him, and he started with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a simple dim ray, like the thread of a spider, shot out from the crevice and fell upon the vulture eye. It was open wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctions, all dull blue with a hideous veil over that chilled the very marrow of my bones. But I could see nothing else of that old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray, as if by instinct, precisely upon that damned spot. And I have not told you that why you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the sense. Now I say, there came on my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as if the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eve. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say louder, every moment. Do you mark me while I have told you that I'm nervous? So I am. And now, at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise to uncontrollable terror, yet for some minutes longer I refrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder. I thought the heart must burst, and now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw upon the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for the many minutes, the heart beat on with muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. it would not be heard through the wall. At length, it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there for many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If still you think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs, and then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scatlings. I then replaced the board so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, would have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I had been too weary of that. A tub had caught all. When I had made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what do I have now to fear? There entered 3 men who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and the officers had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what do I have to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shrink, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man, I mentioned, was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them to search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them there to rest their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumphs, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chattered of familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears. But they still sat and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of them feeling, but it continued and gained deafness until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt now I grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice, yet the sound increased. And what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when it's enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued above trifles in a high key in which violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would it not be gone? I paced the floor and fro with heavy strides, and if excited to fury by the observations of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore, I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated upon the boards, and the noise arose all overly and continually increased. It grew louder and louder, louder, and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard it not? Almighty God, no, they heard, they suspected, they knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This is I thought and I think, but anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt I must scream or die, and now again, hark, louder, 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 louder. Villains, I shrieked. Disassemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here, it's the beating of this hideous heart.